So the ACC has been getting kicked around quite a bit recently, of course, in court, twice against Clemson, twice against Florida State. North Carolina seems to be next, and the league seems to have seen its better days, and a basketball conference that has given it a go in football to become big time and win national championships, which it has, seems to be crumbling. But in the meantime, we look at the ACC historically right here at the Voice of College Football. Please check out the video that we posted last week where we ran through all the schools in the ACC, all 17 of them, and ran through their program accomplishments. And we sized them all up. We applied our point system, and we've got our ACC rankings. Reason we're here tonight is we've given you a couple weeks to digest the results. Check it out. If you have yet to do so, you can do it right now. Check out the ACC video. Check back in. Let us know what you think. And we're going to go through the results right here while we take your calls. The link is in the chat. And also, we'll take your comments and questions. So leave those in the chat as well. The ACC was formed in 1953. We'll check that out here. It's part of our spreadsheet in just a second. 1953. And so you had the bulk of the ACC as charter members way back then, including Clemson, Wake Forest, Duke, North Carolina, NC State, and others. Georgia Tech. No, Georgia Tech was later. Georgia Tech was in 1979. Then there was a big influx into the ACC. So the ACC, despite all of its misgivings and false steps over the last decade or so, the ACC made quite a push from the early 90s for the next 15 years or so to make itself competitive in football, because at the time of the late 80s, throughout the 80s, into the 90s, the ACC was not keeping up with the SEC and the Big Ten and the Pac-10. Not keeping up at all. Not on the field, not in revenue, not in anything, and not in perception for sure. The ACC champion was relegated to the Citrus Bowl. And the ACC champion did not have an automatic bid into a major bowl game until the mid to late 1990s. So the addition of Florida State was probably the best move this conference ever made. And again, I'm not taking a deep dive and investigating every particular move that was made from 1953 on, but just as a general statement, there's no question that one of the best moves that the ACC was able to make was to get Florida State in their conference. Because at the time, consider, if you watched college football in the 70s, 80s, into the 90s, there were tons of independents. There were seasons in which the independents were at the top of the rankings. Notre Dame, Miami, Florida State. You had other independents that played good football at times, like Louisville, Boston College, South Carolina, Syracuse, Maryland, South Carolina, others. Tons of independent teams, West Virginia included. But the ACC plucked away Florida State and really beat a lot of teams to the punch there in 1992 to get Florida State into the ACC. And the Florida State just instantly dominated. They were in the middle of that historic, ridiculous run of top 5 finishes, 14 in a row, finishing in the top 5 in America. Are you kidding me? They were in the midst of that. Therefore, they won their first 29, I believe is the number, 29 consecutive ACC games. Nobody could touch them. Didn't lose a conference game until 1995. And they were the best team in the conference basically from the time they joined in 1992 until the early 2000s. And then, of course, the influx of Miami and Virginia Tech in particular, those were the big gets. Boston College, who would have thought when these schools entered the ACC about 20 years ago, Boston College has made it to more ACC championship games than Miami has. And we say this from time to time when looking back over the last 20 years, what has happened to Miami? They have just been off the radar, off the map, and not competitive in a championship criteria. They've been competitive. They go out there, they play, they don't roll over. Well, they do sometimes. They don't roll over in the way that some of the worst teams in the country, but they have not been competitive against the best. They have been a 7-5 program. 7-5. Just say 7-5. That's Miami for 20 years. So Miami's only made it to one conference championship game during its tenure, and we'll get into that. But the ACC made two big plays after Florida State to stay competitive, to pluck up the best of the independents in the Big East. So when the Big East collapsed, the ACC was waiting with open arms to welcome in the Big East teams, except for West Virginia. Not West Virginia, not Rutgers, but the rest of those schools, yes, Miami, Boston College, Virginia Tech, Louisville, Pitt, Syracuse. And it's been largely a good set of additions for the ACC. All right, let's get into it. And you're going to see criteria all over the place. This is not just us spitballing, okay, these are the best programs of all time in the ACC. And we understand that the system is not perfect, basically because history is not perfect. So when you've got a conference that started in 1953, and most of these programs have been playing football for 50 years before that, then they've got histories aside. They've got good 40 and 50-year histories aside from playing in the ACC. And then you've got programs like Miami that spent all that time as an independent, and Florida State and others, or in other conferences. So you can't fairly weigh everything. It's impossible. It is flat out impossible, but we do our best. So this is more of a ranking of all the schools and their programs as ACC members. This is looking at those programs within the ACC and how they rank all time, not how they rank as ACC programs, if you follow me. Or otherwise, we would just strictly do an ACC comparison during the years in which they have been playing each other. All right, let's get to it. Again, comments and questions are welcome, and calls as well, but we're going to first go through our numbers. So any comments or questions? I don't see any, so let's get right to it. We are simulcasting right now on the Florida State, Miami, and Clemson channels, and yeah, I would have to say that those are the most prominent of the schools. Not necessarily the best, but they are the most prominent. What happened to there we go. So I will let you know what we're seeing here. And why don't we do this? Whoop. We'll try to put this in order. I'm not going to go through everyone. So this is winning percentage. We're going to start there with winning percentage. And again, I'm not going to go through everyone and make this perfect. This is the spreadsheet I've been working from. And there you see the numbers. And of course, we're including Cal, Stanford, and SMU. No, they did not compile these numbers in the ACC. It is just a comparison look at the type of programs that the ACC is getting. So here you go. Blow that up a little bit more. So the number on the far left is winning percentage. Florida State by far has the best all-time winning percentage of any school in the ACC. So that's all-time winning percentage. Florida State's winning percentage since it joined the ACC in 1992 is far higher than 67.1. Far higher than 671 since joining the ACC. Of course, Florida State and Miami were desolate programs until the late 70s. And then guys by the name of Bobby Bowden and Howard Schnellenberger resurrected them and turned them into national powers. So we're going to look at more recent numbers, but these are all-time winning percentage numbers on the far left. Clemson's number 3, just a smidge behind Miami. Virginia Tech's the only other program in the ACC, over 60%. And then we've got a number of teams in that 57 percentile range: Stanford, Pitt, Georgia Tech, and everybody out there. You've all got your different reference points to history. And so probably for some of you, some numbers are curious or surprising, but others you generally feel as though, okay, that seems to be in line. But those are the all-time winning percentages for those programs. The other issue that we run into, so let's take Louisville. Louisville has only been playing major college football and in a power conference for the last 10 years. Have they been in a power conference? Well, they played a high level of football. They were in the Big East. But before that, they were an independent. And again, the strength of schedule we cannot account for. If I was going to add an element to this, and there's a couple different ones I would add. Number one would be strength of schedule. Number two would be winning percentage in conference games. I would love to add that. I definitely will add that component if we do this next year. Boston College, North Carolina, Louisville. And the other thing that might strike some people is that there are far more schools that have winning percentages all time above 50% than below 50%. Does that make sense? So, for example, if this was the NFL or Major League Baseball or the NBA, well, you would have roughly the same number of teams plus 50% that would be under 50% because they're all playing each other. So every game, somebody wins, somebody loses. So it would all add up to 50%, but that's not the case here because we've got a lot of games against group of 5 teams and FCS teams, and the Power 5 wins over 85% of the games against the group of 5, and they win more than 90% of the games against the FCS. Therefore, you've got far more teams schools that are above a 500 all-time record. There are only 2 programs in the ACC that are under 500 all-time, and that's Duke and Wake Forest. Wake Forest might be the worst program in the history of college football. It's a close call. It might be Wake Forest. So forget the next column. It's basically a tabulation toward the point system. But then we go to this 605 number, this one right here. And what that is, so that's the number of points that have been accumulated in the ACC poll, or I'm sorry, the AP poll. So the AP final rankings come out, and they've got a point system that's very simple. It's not complicated. Is it flawed? Yes. It's flawed in this way. If you finish just outside of the AP poll, then you receive no credit. So you could be 9-4 at the end of the year, like my example in the last show. Minnesota's gone 9-4 in 2021 and 2022, and they got exactly as much credit in the AP poll as 2 teams that went 0-12. So that's a fallacy, but it's still an indicator. It's a strong indicator of how dominant or how successful these programs have been down through the years since the AP poll was instituted in 1936. And there we see that Florida State, despite being virtually non-existent before 1978, 77, 78, still leads the ACC with 605 points. Miami's number 2 at 534. Clemson, number 3 at 503. Then I see we've got Georgia Tech at 330. Pitt's at 298. Stanford's got quite the interesting football history. They have had some tremendous teams, tremendous players, but then they have long droughts. Virginia Tech, of course, was built by Frank Beamer. They did virtually nothing before Beamer ball, and they've done nothing since for the most part. So basically, you can, just like Joe Paterno and Bobby Bowden. Well, Bobby Bowden's a bit different because despite all the credit that he deserves for Florida State football, of course, Jimbo Fisher's won a national championship, and now Mike Norvell's winning. So other coaches have won at Florida State since then. But basically, Virginia Tech, yeah, Justin Fuente had 2 pretty decent seasons. But besides that, basically, Frank Beamer's won everything at Virginia Tech. Anything there is because of Frank Beamer. Similar to Joe Paterno at Penn State. Again, James Franklin has won consistently there in the last 10 years, but Joe Paterno's won anything meaningful at Penn State. Same with Frank Beamer at Virginia Tech. North Carolina, interesting football history there. They're not going to rank quite as high as I think a lot of people would think. But individually, they've produced tremendous talent. So again, that column that you see with Florida State on top at 605, those are AP poll points. If you finish number 1 in the country, you get 25 points. You finish number 2, you get 24 points. And on down the line, and the number 25 team in the country gets 1 point. And look at Wake down at the bottom. That's crazy. 33 points accumulated in the history of Wake football. For Virginia to have twice as many points, and 66 is a minuscule number. That's how bad Wake Forest has been. And a couple of those top 25 finishes have come here in the last 6 or 7 years under Dave Clawson. Now, what we have here next are bowl victories. Florida State leads in that too, 29. Clemson 27, Georgia Tech 26, and on down the line. Miami has seemingly not won a bowl game in forever. They're like 1-13 in their last 14 games. So they had 19 a long time ago, or 18 a long time ago, and still can't notch any more wins. Then you see a ton of schools bunched up in the teens, and it makes sense. When you think of Louisville and NC State, can you really separate their football programs, either now or historically? No, they do pretty much the same thing. As you see, the winning percentages all time are almost exact, 525, 515. Their number of bowl wins are about the same. And so there are the bowl wins. Now, this next figure here is the number of major bowl wins. And I will give you in just a few minutes the distinction in the point totals between bowl wins and major bowl wins. Florida State with the most major bowl wins. And Clemson and Miami both have 10. Georgia Tech has 10. Stanford, 8. And on down the line, Virginia, Wake, and North Carolina. I put Maryland there. I didn't add their numbers. I just thought it would be curious since they were a charter member of the ACC and just left in 2014, but I did not add their numbers. That Virginia, Wake, and North Carolina, who last went to a major bowl in 2020 against Texas A&M in the Orange Bowl, the Heels have never won a major bowl. None. Pretty bad. All right, the next figure, let me make sure what we got here. Our next figure will be conference championships. Where are they? Okay. Unfortunately, now we've lost our teams there, but what we got, there we go. So what we have there is, think about this, and we will get to a better metric here in just a second. Clemson's won the most conference championships, 27. And yes, I'm including all conference championships. So Louisville brings them in from the Big East, and Boston College from wherever they were, where they won a conference championship at one point. And yeah, you see all the schools' conference championships, wherever they were won. So that seems like it's not necessarily accurate in terms of evaluating the ACC. Hang on, we get it, but we still have to honor, if we're ranking all-time programs, conference championships won elsewhere. And again, there you see conference championships. So who won the conference this past year? That would have been Florida State won its 16th That only goes back to 1992. So check out the years in which the schools reached the ACC. And sorry, you can't see a team there to match those up. So anyway, we went through those at the start. This next number is interesting because, I don't know that anybody else is doing this. It's one thing to add up conference championships. It is another to determine, okay, take the flat number, the whole number, but also let's understand how long have these schools been in the conference. So Florida State's had 39 less years to win conference championships. However, they've won 16 of 32. So Clemson's won 21 ACC titles, Florida State 16, but Clemson's had 39 more seasons to win them. So that brings it into perspective. You could say Boston College has never won the ACC, but they've only been in the conference since 2005. Miami has never won the ACC. They are 0-4-20. So right there, that is the percentage of conference championships. All right, next we get to national championships. And we are going to go through everybody on Friday night. We're going to throw them all together. We're going to do the entire nation on Friday night, and I'm going to double check national championships. And I am going to explain when we go through our point system what I am doing with national championships, because we are not just going to take the AP or the claimed national championships and take their word for it. We aim to do better here at the Voice of College Football. But for now, we will be very close with these numbers. Miami is 5 national championships. Florida State and Clemson 3. And let's see, who is that? That's Georgia Tech with 3. Pitt has 9 national championships, 9 national titles. And then we go to NFL draft selections. And we've got, there you see the number on the far left. Look at the column on the far left versus the team on the far right. The most NFL draft selections go to Miami, 362. Then Florida State, then Clemson, 287, 280. No, Pitt's at 300. So it's quite a race for the ACC. And again, go back and watch the video because I explain a little bit better where these numbers came from, and also kind of the history and the context behind the numbers, because the numbers are one thing. The numbers don't lie, but people can lie. They can manipulate the numbers. But as long as they're truthful with the numbers, then the numbers are a great base and starting point, a tremendous starting point. I would say it tells us 80% of what we need to know, but then you have to put it into context. So those are all-time NFL draft selections. And then 2 columns over, we've got first-round picks in the NFL draft. And that is led by Miami at 67, dropping all the way down to 47 in Florida State, 40 in Clemson. And then you've got a number of teams in the high 20s like Pitt, Stanford, California, North Carolina. All right. Now, this number here, this column right there, those are all Americans. And leading the way with 55 All-Americans is actually Pitt. Leads in all-time consensus All-Americans. Florida State's number 2. And then you see Miami with 36 at number 3. No, Stanford 37. And then Miami at 36. And I feel a little bit more comfortable putting Stanford, SMU, and Cal into these rankings because NFL draft selections, it's the same regardless of where the schools played and what conference, and also All-Americans. So this is pretty impressive by Stanford being number 3 in the ACC now in all-time All-Americans. Now we go to Heisman Trophy winners, where Florida State has 3. Most recently, Jameis Winston, Miami with 2. Clemson has never won a Heisman Trophy. And all these other schools that you see right there have 1. Now, what's this last number here? This column here, headed up by Florida State's 15, is the number of major award winners. So we didn't just stop with the Heisman Trophy, because that's a quarterback award and used to be a running back award. We want to give credit to all players that are excellent. We want to give it to what was considered to be the number 1 player at that position everywhere. So that means we've included the Biletnikoff, the Mackey, the Doak Walker, the Lombardi, the Remington, the Nagurski, the Butkus, the Lombardi, the Thorpe, all of them, every position award. And Florida State leads 15-12 over Miami. Pitt's number 3 with 10. Virginia has never won. Cal has never won. SMU has never won a major award. All right. So that is the deal. So we will certainly get to your calls. And while we do that, I'm going to run in the background our video from last week. So please check it out. And I'm just going to let it fly. And you're going to see a lot of these categories. You're going to see them running in the background so you can kind of get a second look at all of this. All right. Meanwhile, you have to look at me twice. All right. That's not. Is that correct? What do we got? Bingo. There we go. All right. We're going to take some calls, hear from you and what you've got to say. We had somebody try to call us. They were not able to call, but we're going to go to our second call. We got Chris on the line. Chris, what's going on?
Hey, Mark.
How are you?
Good. How are you?
I am doing just fine. What's up?
I didn't really catch most of your show. I'm sorry. So if I
That's okay.
don't contribute anything meaningful, you have to take that in consideration, I guess. But I was just curious, Mark, and this isn't a criticism of you at all, because I know you work really hard. In fact, I'm impressed with how hard you really work. But
Thank you.
no, I am. I'm not just saying that. I mean, you work harder than anybody I know. Let's put it that way. And you deliver a good product, and I think you should be proud of that. Um,
Thank
anyway,
you.
no, I mean it, because you do a good job. Anyway, the reason I was calling, though, I was just curious. I know how you do that. I don't know how you do the summary. It doesn't really matter, I guess. But one question, I guess, I just was curious about, because I have my own opinion. It's not that my opinion really makes any difference. I'm sure it really doesn't. But when you count these championships, I guess the question I might have just is, is there one? I mean, this is going to be some kind of stupid, probably, but you have to take that in consideration coming from me, I guess. But these championships, is it based on? I would think that, I know when they win those championships, they give them full credit for being like is it 100% of it? Because like I would think, like, for example, you said, I think Boston College, I think, was in one of the ACC championship games, right?
Yes. A
Um,
couple.
so you said they didn't ever win one, but I guess the question I have would be, so if they don't win the championship game, that just means that they're just one of the number of teams that weren't selected to partake. I guess the question I have is, you don't give any credit, I guess, for being in the game, for being in the championship game.
I did not. No, I'm not saying that shouldn't be part of the criteria. I'm certainly open to suggestions, but part of the limitations are just simply the limitations. I can't count everything. So there are certain things that I would like to include, but so for example, strength of schedule, I would love to have a strength of schedule component. If somebody would find or come across a strength of schedule component that I could just simply look at and apply to this, then I would
Right.
do that. But I obviously can't go back to the beginning of time and count every game and figure out strength of schedule for every team in the history of a conference.
No.
But
Well,
I
I
would
wouldn't.
love that to be part of the metric.
Something I don't know if you'd be interested in this or not, but in my own, what do you call it? My own independent, I guess, investigation, or whatever you want to call it. It's not really an investigation, but survey. It's really just a survey when I do it. It's not really an investigation, but I noticed though, with all the, I guess, is it that they moved some of these, the SEC? I know that they're still the SEC, and I know that's still the Big Ten, and I know that they still carry the same, what is it, cloud or whatever that they had before. But are they separating themselves now? Is that kind of a, I don't know. I've heard different things said about it, like that now you have the SEC and Big Ten kind of at the top, and then I guess any other teams, I guess, that they want to maybe add to that to make it better. But does that mean that these other teams, like the ones that you're just talking about, because I would think that even like in the ACC, I think you've kind of talked about it a little bit. It's not like they're all exactly at the same degree of ability there. So does that weigh into, like, I don't know how to put it other than how do we assess each program if they're not really at the same degree of ability? I guess how do you look at that, or do you look at that?
Well, if you're conjecturing about what could happen in the future, there are all sorts of ideas and indicators of what is coming. And yes, the SEC and the Big Ten are in the best position. They make the most money, they draw the most attention. They are, in fact, more and more running the sport. Now, whether they will officially take hold to run the sport remains to
Well,
be seen, but there's certainly the power players that seem to be getting their way, that they are getting their way and moving things in certain directions. And unfortunately, if you're like me and you want everyone to participate and everyone to have a share in this and want to see some of the lesser programs continue to play big time college football, there's an strong indication that that's not going to be the case, that the SEC and the Big Ten are going to grab whom they want and
right.
probably allow the Big 12 to exist. But besides that, there's going to be a lot of schools left to the wayside. And we might have, instead of 70 power conference teams, 40. Those seem to be the around estimations of how many teams will land to at the end.
Well, does that mean, I guess the question I have then along those lines, because I already count 35. So are they going to, maybe you can tell me who that, I mean, that's including Notre Dame. So if they already have 35, which I'm not saying they do, but that's just where I have it right there.
Yes.
Just put them together, add Notre Dame, I get 35. So if they're going to add those five, are those all ACC schools then? Or is it like Clemson, Miami? I mean, maybe you can tell me who those five are.
Well, I can't tell you. We can conjecture. I don't know anything more than you do.
Oh, I
We
see.
only know, we can only take uh, evidence. And the evidence right now is that Florida State and Clemson are suing the ACC to get out of the ACC.
Right.
North Carolina's administrators made comments this week that they need to make a lot more money and get out of the ACC. Miami's been rumored to leave.
Okay.
And you got to think that if those three leave, Miami is soon to leave as well. And so then the ACC either is able to maintain a much diminished league and they get relegated to group of five status, or maybe the entire conference falls apart and the Big 12 pluck up much of the ACC, or a number of things can happen.
Sure.
We don't know how it's going to land
But see, I guess
exactly.
the question I'm not saying you're not answering it, but I guess the question I still have is there really, I mean, I listened to what you were saying about what was it, the people that won the major awards and how it was like kind of like Miami, and, is there really, I guess the question I still kind of have, and I'm not saying you're not saying it, but is there really that, I mean, I kind of have a question because I don't know the degree to which, I know, for example, was it last year that they said that Big 12 was really kind of one of the selling points of it was that it wasn't just that it had several good teams in it, which I think it always usually does, but they said that it was fairly evenly distributed in terms of there really wasn't one team that really jumped out at you.
Yes.
Um, it's not quite the same, is it, in the Atlantic Coast Conference? I know they have a lot of really good quality programs, but is there a bigger, what do you call it, distribution, I guess, from the best, the highest to the lowest? Is that kind of a, I know you said Virginia doesn't have like a Heisman or whatever else, but is it because, I guess the question I have, Mark, is why, I don't understand exactly why it would be that way, because I would think if you have a conference and if you have, I would think at some point they would all kind of even themselves out to where it would be fairly close, I guess, in terms of the way they play. That doesn't seem to really be the case though, does it?
No.
But I don't understand though. I mean, what's the selling point, for example? I'm not to criticize any of these schools, but I mean, is it really that much to play at Miami, Florida? That really, to me, it's like you could play football wherever you want, and I don't understand why it would necessarily be a better deal to go to Miami, Florida than it would be to go to maybe Wake. You said Wake Forest. Is
Well,
it, or is it something else?
down through history, a number of factors have had uh, proven to be impactful in terms of football programs being built and run. And those would include resources, meaning boosters,
Yeah.
alumni that are willing to support,
Is it the
and
is it the size of the
administrations
school?
that are committed to football or they're
Right.
not committed to football, good hiring practices, making smart hires. It's just like any corporation in America. Some succeed, some fail. Some have better resources based on their own ability to create those resources. Some, by dumb luck, have better resources. That's why, from the beginning of this nation, companies tended to thrive if they were near major waterways for obvious reasons because of shipping and other things. So those companies and those states thrived while others did not. You could make that analogous to recruiting. So it's easier to recruit to Florida State, Miami than it is to recruit to Boston College or Syracuse.
Well, no, but that's based mostly just on the fact that they've been, fairly good for a long time, right? I mean, I
But
don't
it's
know.
also based on there being better football players in those areas,
Oh, I
high
see.
school players.
But I would think, I mean, not knowing, because I don't know much about it, honestly, Mark, I really don't. But I would think at some point it would be like, well, especially with the new, I guess, new rules that are coming into play, where I don't know if it's I don't know if it's going to be the same kind of like the way the NFL does it, where each team, I guess, has a bankroll or whatever. But I would think if it is the same, though, I would think that at some point it's not going to necessarily be an advantage to commit to one school over the other, is it? I mean, or is it going to be because like you said, they maybe have a stronger support base, I guess, maybe in like a, I don't know if it'd be, I don't know really much about Miami, but is that what draws people there? I know it's a great place to probably be anyway, but I'm not sure I know enough about the school to say much about it. I know I visited there once and it was pretty, but so is it the location maybe that's bringing them there?
Well,
Is
I
that
would say that we could make a list of the major components to which any student athlete chooses to go to any particular football program. And that list would include, in some order, money, okay, because they
yeah?
can now receive NIL collective money and would have received that and have under the table in the past. So, money. Then also NFL development. Is this coaching staff, is this team, is this program going to develop me for the NFL? Have they proven that they do this on a regular basis, especially at my position? Next, do they win championships? Do they win games? Am I going to win here? Also, just the location. Yes. Can my family see me play? Do I want to stay close to home? Most people do. Some don't care, but they generally, I think, even in this day and age, and it's a much smaller world than it used to be, players still generally stay within the geographic region of their home. And then also included would be depending on that student athlete's uh, desire to gain a great education, then that also comes into play.
Well, no, but those schools aren't. I mean, aren't they kind of known for? I mean, I don't know enough about it to really. I mean, any number of those schools, I think, would be. They're pretty much known for being good academic schools, aren't they? I mean, so is it really? Is that really what makes the difference? I mean, I wouldn't think that. I know that, for example, I mean, I understand what maybe like Wake Forest, you're not necessarily going to want to go there to play football. I understand that because I mean, it's not necessarily, but it's still to get a good school or to get education. I mean, I don't know that you're going to find a better school than that, right? And so it's like I don't quite understand exactly, other than the fact that maybe they don't what support their football team as strongly as like a
Well, that's part of it as well. People want to go play where they're going to get national television exposure, and they're going to get exposure in a stadium with 100,000 people and not play in front of 28,000 apathetic people.
well, no, but I would think if the conference itself is doing a good job in terms of how it presents itself, I would think all those schools I would think would be a good place to go. That's kind of what I don't understand. I wouldn't think it would be a matter of like, well, you can't really go to Purdue or not Purdue, um, one school over the other just because it's I would think they don't work together to kind of try to get a better recruit for everybody. I would think they'd at some point they'd all kind of try to work together. I mean, it doesn't
Work.
really
So
make a
why
big
are they working together? They're competitors.
well in terms of like it's kind of like the what do you call it? It's like I know that they're competing against each other, I guess, for the best players. I understand that, but I would think in terms of like marketing itself, it'd be like hey, let's maybe this player he's not quite fit for our program, but we could I would think maybe they'd help each other out a little bit to make the brand a little bit stronger, I guess.
Why?
Well, just it's kind of like if you say what you say is true, then what's going to end up happening? Maybe not right away, probably not right away, maybe not even be for a few years, but some of these programs themselves are going to be saying, well, we could do better if we leave so I would think the ACC itself would try to bring in the best players they could so that none of them would leave. Is kind of what I'm trying to tell you.
Yeah, I would put it this way. In the example that you just gave, I would state it this way. I'm not going to say that it never happens, but it happens more in this way. That if Clemson is interested, or let's say more so, a particular player's interested in Clemson, but they determine that that player isn't good enough to play at Clemson, they may certainly say, hey, we've got connections with our coaching staff and people that we know at places like Georgia Southern and Georgia State and a lot of group of five schools in the area, Appalachian State, and other places where we will send them your tape and you can get a look there.
Well, there's no, I guess, what am I trying to tell you? There's no scratch my back scratchers going on there anywhere. I would think that they'd want to like help each other out to get the best
Why would
product.
they help each other out?
Well, I'm just thinking in terms of making a better program for, you're only as good as your competition, right? So if you're really good and the rest of them aren't very good, that's not going to be I don't even know, at some point that doesn't become a selling point. That's more like, I mean, I would think that
Yeah,
you'd want
I think we're getting way too far into the weeds about particulars and things that don't exist.
well, I don't understand why they don't though. I would think that at
Wha-
some point
I'm telling you, they don't exist. I'm telling you that there are coaches, yes, that want to help players that won't necessarily be playing for them and give them a good reference and help them try to find a place to play. Yes, that happens, but they're not going to help their direct competition. Clemson's not in the business of saying we've got too many good signees in our 2024 class, we're going to give some to Florida State. Why don't you guys go over there and play?
well, that's not exactly what I was saying. I was just making, if maybe the way like a program sells itself is like if you come to us, you'll be playing against the best schools. You know what I mean? It's like you'll not only be playing for you'll be
Sure.
playing against some. I would think the conference itself would want to elevate itself to a point where there isn't an advantage really to leave, and that's why I don't understand
Well,
why.
the conference does not control these schools. This is not a self-contained situation where a student athlete can only go to the ACC, so the ACC is trying to find them the best fit. The
The same.
conference has nothing to do with it.
Well, I guess the question I would have then at that does each conference have to follow? Do the bylaws do they apply to each conference independently, or is that just something I don't know that I understand? I mean, part of being in a conference isn't it that they all have to kind of agree to follow the same set of standards?
Yes, if you're a member of the conference, you agree to the
You
guidelines and
don't.
conditions and bylaws of the conference.
You don't. You won't be in there for very long. is what I was
True.
thinking.
Yes.
So what is it about the ACC that makes it a bad fit for like Florida State? I still don't quite understand why that's an
They're
issue
not making enough money
compared to everybody else.
compared to their competition outside the ACC.
Oh, I see. So it's a matter of there's a better product being delivered at the Big Ten level, I guess.
Yes.
But I still don't
That's it.
understand why though. I don't really
Why?
yeah.
Because the Big Ten draws more eyeballs, therefore they are able to negotiate better contracts.
Is there a higher population associated with each Big Ten school? Greater population?
Mm, I can't answer that. Not necessarily.
Okay. So
The
it's something
the
else that
the footprint of the ACC is growing rather well, especially North Carolina, Virginia.
yeah. Yeah, that's a major. I think remember when they added Maryland, I think that was one of the things was they said that I guess maybe it's the general what is it? The population around Maryland's fairly dense, I guess. Does that sound right to you? When they added Maryland, that was one of the teams they
Yes,
added. Wasn't that one of the reasons?
yes, the DMV.
Um, if you were to add, let's say, this is just a guess, I don't know. Let's just say you had to add 6 schools. Would you add any of the Big 12 schools? You had to
If
add
I
six
was
schools.
who?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I don't even know if they're looking to add schools, Mark. But let's just say that you had to add 6 schools. Would you add any of the Big 12, or would it make you all the ACC?
If I was either conference, Big Ten or SEC, and I had 6 schools to add, I would add Notre Dame, Florida
Right.
State, Miami, Clemson, North Carolina. What's that? 5.
Yeah.
Number 6 would be
North Carolina State.
probably yes. Before I would go to the Big 12, I would go grab a school that had rivalries and ties to North Carolina, whether that was NC State or Duke, probably NC State.
You know who I have rated? I mean, not that this really matters, but one of the schools, actually 3 schools that you didn't mention. I'm not saying that you were neglecting them, but I did the over my survey, I guess, over the last season. I had 3 Big 12 schools I think that would be interesting, if not necessarily for the Big Ten, but it would be Kansas, Kansas State, and West Virginia. I don't know if you thought about either one of those, but they all seem to be doing pretty well.
I've thought about them, but they don't draw enough attention. They don't make enough money to be of interest to the Big Ten.
Oh, I see.
Most
All right.
likely, it all depends on how this breaks.
Well, no, I just was curious if you understood that. I knew that there was at least 3 Big 12 schools that had a pretty good, season, I guess.
Sure. Well,
And
it's not about just how good they are in football right now. It's about how much money they can generate.
but don't they kind of go together though? I mean, if you don't have a good
Somewhat.
team, you don't think it'd be a good thing to add West Virginia? That wouldn't be a good.
I don't think they really add anything to the Big Ten. No,
Oh,
I don't think it would be a bad addition. I just don't think it would be. This is pretty much what it comes down to, Chris. The Big Ten, they want. Let's say they're looking at West Virginia. They want West Virginia to be an academic fit,
right.
and they're not. But
Okay.
let's say they even look past that, and they will go to their broadcasting partners, Fox, NBC, and CBS, and say, because right now they're earning a certain amount of money from all of those networks, and they have to divide it 18 ways. And so they say we are going to add West Virginia, and then Fox, NBC, and CBS go back to the drawing board and factor in West Virginia in different time slots, and then they determine, okay, they add this much worth to your conference, and then the Big Ten determines whether by splitting the pie another time into 19 pieces, whether that made any sense. Now, that's a very simple way to look at it, but that's the core of it.
Well, I would think just the fact that they're winning football games, I would think maybe it would be a reason to add them, but I don't know. I don't really
No,
look farther
no,
beyond that.
because they can stop winning football games next year.
Yeah, but they tend to gravitate back to being pretty good, though, right? I
Yeah,
mean,
they do.
yeah. I mean, it's not like I'm selling you somebody that might not. I mean, maybe with Kansas, I don't know. Maybe that wouldn't be a good one, but like I said, Kansas State for the I know Kansas State historically isn't really very good. I mean, I understand that, but I would still think that I know, for example, the one game you didn't talk about BYU. I don't know that you really need to, but they did play in one major bowl game. I think in their history against Kansas State in the Cotton Bowl.
Yes.
I don't know if you include the Cotton Bowls, and maybe you don't, but so that but anyway, when they played Kansas State in the Cotton Bowl, it was almost like playing in an away game. It was like I don't know how many fans were there from Manhattan, Kansas, but it was like
Yeah. We're getting off track of the ACC.
oh okay. Yeah, I didn't mean to. I just
Well, I appreciate the call, Chris.
all right. Thanks, Mark.
Have a good night.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
And so we were checking out our ACC rankings right here at the Voice of College Football. And I'm going to go through the point system and let you know how we devise these points. But we had yet to get to a few things. And hopefully you guys have absorbed some of the stats that you see on the screen. I believe we're looking at all-time winning percentage right now. So let's go to these metrics. And before I get blamed, as has happened in other videos with other conferences, and maybe even this one, I get blamed for recency bias. I am about to show you numbers that did not factor into the point system. They are just to put things into context. Okay? So this did not factor into the point system. This is simply a good reference point. So, see Florida State there? That record right next to Florida State is their winning percentage since 1970. Florida State's got the best winning percentage in the ACC. Out of ACC teams, obviously Florida State was not in the ACC until 1992, but out of schools in the ACC, they have the best winning percentage since 1970 at 707. Clemson's number 2 you see there, and I understand it's a little difficult to track since they're not in order, but I can't put every column in order. And again, I didn't necessarily intend on presenting these numbers. This is the spreadsheet in which I use to build the videos. Miami's number 3, I believe it's 658, and those 3 schools are way ahead of everyone else. There are no other schools in the ACC that are above 60% winning percentage since 1970. And Miami and Florida State had to withstand a rough first 7 or 8 seasons out of those 54. So this is, again, going back to 1970. There you see it's been extremely rough for Wake in particular. They are far below everyone else. But after the top 3, Pitt had its stretch in the 70s, early 80s, where they were extremely strong. Virginia Tech under Beamer, North Carolina under Mac Brown, a couple nice runs in the 90s. And then here in the last couple of years, they've been decent and on down the line. And the numbers that we're looking at are the most valid with those teams that have been in the ACC for that entire time, which would be Clemson, Georgia Tech, North Carolina, Duke, NC State, Virginia, and Wake. Okay, in the middle column, or the second from the left, we have winning percentage since the year 2001. In the 21st century, Clemson's number 1. Look at Clemson since 2001. Not close, winning over 74% of its games. Florida State's number 2, not surprisingly, and Miami's number 3. And of course, Miami started this century out in great shape in 2001, 2, 3, 4, and then it dissipated from there. There you see the great teams from Frank Beamer and Virginia Tech pushing their winning percentage to 625. Pitt's been decent. Georgia Tech's been pretty decent under Paul Johnson. Louisville's been strong, but of course, most of that was done in the Big East. And Wake's under 500. Virginia has been the worst. No, Syracuse. Syracuse has been the worst program in the ACC since going back to 2001 at 416, the winning percentage. Okay, the next column, with the lowest numbers that have a winning percentage there, and I'll highlight those. That is the record and winning percentages of all those schools during the college football playoff era. Look at Clemson. That is the third best record in all of college football, behind Alabama and Ohio State. 119 and 20. That's crazy good, and completely leaves everyone else in the dust. And do appreciate the super chat coming in from Nick. Thank you for the 199 spot. Clearly, 1984 BYU would be undefeated today easily. Thank you for that, Nick. We appreciate your contribution. Again, back to the CFP era records. Florida State strong, of course. Bobby Bowden, his lesser years for the most part during that time. And then the Jimbo Fisher years, which were strong by and large, and then on into Mike Norvell, and a rough spot for Florida State for the last 5 years before Norvell's last 2 seasons. And Duke with David Cutcliffe were decent. They're over 500 barely. North Carolina at 531. And when you add it all up, you've got a glut of schools that they have their ups and downs, but when you shake it all out over a long period of time, they're pretty much right there. They're pretty much the same program. NC State, Louisville, North Carolina, Virginia Tech, Pitt, they're pretty much the same. They are 7-5 to 8-4. That's who they are. Now, NC State under Dave Doran, he's had a nice run here. He used to take a lot of crap from me because you'd have to watch the videos. Go look at the Dave Doran videos that I produced, just wondering, why does this guy have a job? Well, he's turned it around since then. So he's had a nice run of seasons that has left him and his program at 614 winning percentage, which is number 4 in the ACC. A pretty clear number 4 in the ACC for Dave Doran and NC State. Nick, we'll get to you in just a second. And then on the far right, what we have there, let me remove our graphic, is we've got, okay, remember the AP poll points? I figured, you know what? These AP poll points don't mean a whole lot to anyone. Seeing 752, 359, 1114. All they mean is, well, Clemson must be better than Georgia Tech all time because they've got 300 more poll points. Okay, we put it into this form, far right. And what all that means is that the first number is the number of times in which that program has finished ranked. So let's just say the top 25, even though for a long time it was a top 20, top 25 ranking. Florida State 35 times, Clemson 37 times, Miami 33. Again, those three are far and away above everyone else. Georgia Tech at 24, Pitt at 21, Stanford, Virginia Tech at 20. Okay. The next number, top 10 finishes. Florida State 22. Miami 17, Clemson 13. Shoot, Dabo Swinney, out of those 13, he's got probably 9 of those. Like 2012, 13, 15, 16. He's got like 8 or 9 of those. Anyway, and then the final column there are top 5 finishes. Florida State with the most. Of course, I believe 14 of those were in a row under Bobby Bowden. Then we've got Miami. We've got Clemson with 7. And look at some of these schools here, like down at the bottom. Look at this. Look at NC State. So NC State, we just applauded Dave Doran's job of winning 61% of his games in the last 10 years. But look at that last column. NC State has finished in the top 25 15 times. That's it. 15. 0 times in the top 10, 0 times in the top 5. Virginia, 9 times ranked. They have never finished better than, I believe, number 13 in the country. 0 top 10, 0 top 5. Wake has finished in the top 25 5 times. That's it. Never in the top 10, never in the top 5. Cal's finished in the top 5 4 times. Okay. Let's go to our caller. Nick's on the line. Nick, what's going on tonight?
Hey, Mark.
How are you?
Doing great. How you doing?
I'm good.
Well, big fan of the show. Big fan of everything you do with
Thank
our
you.
Knoll brethren. I'm a big FSU fan.
Well, this all has to look good to you.
It does, and it has me thinking because I get in debates with my cousins live in Alabama. Drives me nuts. But I keep kind of with conference realignment playing with a thought exercise. If the ACC, back when they were visionaries, getting Miami, Virginia Tech, had those two schools kind of not had dips in their performance, giving the statistics, might the ACC be about as powerful as the SEC now? Could they have shaped themselves into a Big Ten or an SEC if they just hadn't, signed really awful media rights deals and kind of the things they did administratively, but also performance of the team's been a bit better in the kind of mid-tier?
So it's a great question. So what it reminds me of is a video I produced after the 2016 season. And in 2016, I still believed that the SEC was the best conference, but the ACC had the best performance on the field, not just because Clemson won the national championship, but in regards to major bowl performances, uh, overall bowl performances. I think the league went 11-3, and also the league during the regular season played the best football, had the best record. And my thought was not just because of one season, but North Carolina is exploding and has been exploding in population and growth and expansion and money for decades.
Oh, yeah.
And Virginia is very strong as well in terms of wealth and population. And my thought process was, okay, what does the ACC have that the Big Ten does not have? And that's population growth and recruiting. If you would have looked at the ACC footprint in 1980 versus the Big Ten, well, the Big Ten had better football players because they were in Ohio and Pennsylvania and in the Chicago area and elsewhere. But now the ACC has better football players in its footprint than the Big Ten. So my thought was not that I was making a prediction that it was going to happen, but I said the ACC, and I also looked at recent NFL draft selections and how strong that the ACC had closed the gap on the Big Ten, and we're running a couple drafts consecutively, number 2 to the SEC. And I thought that the ACC had an opportunity to run past the Big Ten and challenge the SEC as the best conference. That clearly has not happened.
Variety of good reasons why it hasn't happened. I just feel like this footprint gave them an opportunity, which was obviously well wasted by administrative decisions, we'll say.
Yeah, I might be assuming a lot by making this statement, but it has an appearance. It has an appearance from a lot of schools that they are fine because they have other objectives, other priorities, whether those are academic, and I defend those because that's why these places exist. Let's go back to the origin of these institutions. They exist to educate students, but I cannot imagine that Boston College truly believes that it can compete in football nationally. I think that they believe we're in a good place. If let's say this grant of rights business wasn't going on and the ACC was not being challenged, and this was 5 years ago, that Boston College is okay with, not that they want to go 3-9, but if they go 7-5, that's not embarrassing. They look respectable. They go to a bowl game. Okay, we're one of 80 teams that go to a bowl game, and one of 45 in the Power Five that go to a bowl game. And so that's pretty respectable. and that makes us extra money, gives us extra prestige. We go 7-5. We make our paycheck from the league, from the TV networks, our 40 million, and we get decent attendance, and we turn a profit, and we can afford a lot of other things because we don't go overboard on football to try to win. We maintain the integrity of our institution, but football makes us a heck of a lot of money, and it draws attention to us, and we're pretty comfortable with that. So we're good with that. If we can go 7-5 most of the time, we're fine. And I think you could probably say the same for Syracuse, Wake Forest, Duke, and some other schools.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else, Nick?
No, sorry. I just no, I really agree with that. I think with the lawsuits though, it's kind of becoming more evident, kind of what happened and why we hadn't gone that route. Because I think, in my perfect world, I think the Big Ten might have been kind of third tier, because in the South, you do have more elite talent and such as far as football goes, with Texas, Florida, missing out on California, but the Pac-12 should have been able to capitalize on that. Now the way that realignment has gone, it's kind of weird because of where the talent is focused in the country. I mean, you mentioned Ohio, which is very strong, but that's where the Big Ten and their leadership has really done a good job, I think. And obviously SEC leadership hasn't wasted a breath and taken advantage of a situation, which is what they're supposed to do. So
what I think is kind of fascinating is that we know Florida State and Clemson want out of the ACC, and they're very confident that they are well positioned to go somewhere else. Not necessarily that they'll get their choice, but between the SEC and the Big Ten, they should be able to go somewhere. And then I think North Carolina is pretty confident, and Miami confident that they are attractive and would be taken by somebody. Then I got to think that you've got schools at the bottom of the rungs, like Wake Forest and Louisville, or not Louisville, Wake Forest, Syracuse, Boston College, that know that we want the ACC to hang on. And even if those schools leave, that we can have 12 or 14 of us hang on, throw something together, stay somewhat relevant, and hopefully just get a bid to the college football playoff, and we can keep making money and be part of this. But I think what I find interesting is the middle schools: NC State, Louisville, Pitt, Virginia Tech. Maybe not Virginia Tech. I would think that they would have a decent landing, but them determining what do we want, and we have to read the tea leaves, and we have to read the SEC and the Big Ten to determine, will they want us or don't they want us? Should we be pushing the Clemson, Florida State narrative, and should we be supporting them to crash and burn this whole league so we can get out, make more money, and be in a better place? Or do we hold on for dear life and support the ACC, try to keep it together, because we're not going to have a place?
Yeah, and the entire situation in the state of North Carolina, with the politicos getting involved too, is kind of fascinating, because you don't know really what direction that's going to go. It's one thing with the court cases and judges, you just know that's going to take forever. But with the jockeying there about, okay, UNC wants to do this, what happens to NC State? What happens to the ACC? Therefore, what happens to Duke? And all this, it's just going to be crazy.
I hear you, Nick. Is there anything else you wanted to bring up?
No, I just appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Appreciate the call. Have a good night.
You too.
Just checking on the chat and also checking on the viewership. I always weigh this and try to determine, okay, we've got a subject here where we're talking ACC football. So we've got 3 healthy ACC channels. We've got a couple other ones, North Carolina, Virginia Tech. They're just sitting there. Truth be known, they're just sitting there. So we're not going to deal with them. right now, but we've got Clemson, Florida State, Miami. Then also we got the main channel. So my thought process is, do we just broadcast on the main channel and advertise on those other channels to get people over to the main channel? Or do we simulcast on all these? And I appreciate it, Jim. Do what Jim is doing, everyone. Please hit the like button. We appreciate that. So the thought process is either, are we gaining more viewers because they're going to be people that are only subscribed to Miami, Clemson, or Florida State that will only get this because it's broadcast on their channel? Or do we advertise on those channels and try to bring everybody to the main channel? So I kind of wrestle back and forth with that. And it used to seem most effective to simulcast and get the biggest audience possible everywhere put together. Now it seems as though we only dilute the audience everywhere, and maybe YouTube punishes me for that. So I don't know. I'm spouting YouTube strategies to all of you who don't care, but that's what's going through my head right now, because we've had about 60 on the line and there's only about 25 or 30 on the main channel. So then the other 3 channels are dividing 30 people. So not necessarily the best of the situation, but we will continue to march on. We got Austin on the line. Austin, what's going on?
How you doing today on this wonderful Monday, Mr. Mark?
This wonderful Monday. It is a wonderful Monday. I appreciate that. How are you?
I am good, and I come to talk some ACC football with you.
That's why we're here.
So one of the couple things I wanted to ask you, Mark, is I saw that you had the CFP era up there when you were playing the video through.
It's up there right now.
How important is that when you're putting this list together, Mark? Because a team could sometimes be so dominant in one era, but then they fall off. Kind of like Clemson, they were dominant for like the CFP era, like you showed in the video. But now we're starting to see Florida State ascend back up, and hopefully, like Louisville made a jump up this year, and you're seeing these teams come back around. How does that demerit your list, or does it at all, Mark?
Okay, so just to be clear, and we're going to go through the point totals here in a few minutes. Just to be clear, the 4 lists that you see right there. So for anybody just joining us, where you see Florida State at the top left, you see right next to them a record and winning percentage. That is Florida State's record and winning percentage since 1970. And then everybody else. The next column is everyone's record and winning percentage since 2001 during the 21st century. And then, as you just mentioned, the one that I've got highlighted because you mentioned it, that's the CFP era 2014 and on record and winning percentage. Okay. I only put those together to show everyone this is what's happened in the last 10 years. This is what's happened in the last 20 or 25 years. This is what's happened in the last 50 plus years. Just as a reference point, just as a discussion point. None of those factor into the point totals. The point totals are all all-time point totals.
Gotcha. Now that makes a little more sense, Mark. Because a lot of people sometimes take those out of proportion. Because if a team wins a lot, like Clemson did, they would say, oh, that should make them number one. It doesn't matter what you did in the past. That's why I was like, how do you factor in the eras?
Well, it all depends on what you're ranking. And that's why every time somebody calls me and they want to debate something, I first ask them clearly, what are we debating? Are we debating the best program now? Are we debating the best program all time? Are we debating the best program this century? What are we debating here? So this is an all-time ranking.
Gotcha. And another thing is, Mark, that I would like to touch on is how do you factor in division rankings with this? Division titles, meaning when there was the Coastal and the Atlantic. When teams would win those, you do not? Okay.
Well, I'm not saying every time somebody brings something up just to be clear, Austin, I'm not saying that it shouldn't be counted or that it's not valuable or relevant. I'm just saying I didn't do it. I can't count everything.
Okay.
So I didn't find it that meaningful.
Mm-hmm. That's fair,
As you
Mark.
well know, as a Louisville guy, as you well know, over the last 10
Mm-hmm.
years, the ACC Coastal has been awful compared to the Atlantic. And therefore, shoot, Pitt went 7-7 and won the ACC Coastal one year. Those teams have
That's why
generally won 4 and 5 games and won division championships.
that's why I bring that up, Mark, because as you know, Mark, Clemson won for a long time. Coastal. I believe they were in the Coastal. Yeah, Clemson was in the Coastal, correct?
No, the Atlantic.
The Atlantic. Thank you. I got it reversed. Clemson was winning that like a whole lot, and they were going on to win the ACC. But you get teams like you said, a Pitt that went 7-7 and would win the Coastal, and I mean the Coastal, and it would be like, how do you count that? Because Pitt didn't win the ACC, but they did win that division. So I didn't know if you took it in like how the NFL does. If you win the division, that counts towards something in your all-time demerit, or if you just look at it as you won the division, but you didn't win the ACC. So, and it's not as important.
So, Austin, the two things that I would add, if I was going to add something, would be I would add strength of schedule. But
okay,
unless somebody can find me a website where that is clearly there for everyone, I can't do that. That's just way beyond my capabilities to add a strength of schedule that goes back to 1869. But if I could, if it's available, I would add strength of schedule. And then number 2, I would add, and I believe I will next year, add conference winning percentage.
Gotcha. Well, and I'm glad you bring up the strength of schedule, Mark. Like, how do you view that as a perspective of when Clemson was on that run of beating teams like Alabama, Ohio State, in the CFP playoffs? Did that help move Clemson up in the rankings more than maybe push them maybe ahead of some of the teams, maybe like almost push them ahead of a Miami that they're behind? Or is that simply just adding to their resume of their titles of who they beat to win them in terms of all-time ACC ranking?
Okay, in terms of my rankings, winning
Yes.
those games adds points in this way. So if we go down here, we see that, and again, I apologize, there's no headings to this. I'll just have to tell you what's what. So if you go to there, that's the number of bowl wins for those programs. So Clemson's winning bowl games against playoff competition. And then also I've got major bowl wins, and that figure, I'm sorry, this is the list. Major bowl wins, I'm counting those double of a bowl win.
Mm-hmm. So the national title is considered a major bowl win. It's not a separate category. Just to double check.
Well, we've got national championships as well. Let's see where those are.
Okay.
National championships are right here, and I'm giving those 5 points each. So those are worth 5 times what, let's say, a bowl win is worth. And I'm not saying, again, that this is the perfect system or anything. It can be changed or altered or tweaked. But that row that I've got highlighted right there are the number of national championships.
Now, what I find interesting, Mark, is you brought up Pitt and how many titles they won. Now, why is it that Pitt's like a little lower on the list with the titles that they won? Do you hold those as, like, what's the value you hold those at? For you personally, Mark, would you say if you win the title, you're considered the best in your sport? All accounts, right? Pitt leads. Oh, go ahead, Mark.
My system, if you're talking about the system I built credits a 1910 national championship just as much as a 2023 national championship. For me personally, I would
Mm-hmm.
argue all day that a 2023 national championship is far more valid than a 1910 national championship.
Okay, so it goes back to kind of like the eras thing. Like if Pitt won theirs like a whole lot earlier, and say the Florida States and Clemson's who won theirs more recently, you would value those a little more than you would some of the
Me-
older titles.
Me
Which-
personally, I do, but this system does not. The system
Okay,
counts them all the same.
gotcha. So I got a better understanding of that now. So the system, you would count them more towards their point. But for Mark Rogers personally, as a whole, you would count the recent titles more than the system. Okay.
Yes. And,
Mark,
if anybody out
that's
there
all
wants
I-
an explanation, I'm sorry, Austin, go ahead.
Oh, my bad, Mark. You're sorry about that.
Well, no, that's fine. If you're done, that's fine. But I was going to explain, whether it's with you still on the phone or when we get off the phone, I was going to explain my reasoning about weighting national championships heavier. Me personally, again, let's separate everyone. This is the system I built where every number, every year is counted the same. But for me personally, I value recent national championships much more, let's say in the last 50 years or so, much more than a national championship back in 1900.
And I understand that now, Mark, because thank you for clearing that up, because that was one of the big things about. Because when I saw the national titles, I was like, why not here a little lower than the system where you count in? And now I appreciate you
I
for clearing that
I
up for
think
me.
we basically lost you, Austin, but we appreciate you stopping by, sir. It's great to hear from you.
Yeah, Mark, you have a good day, sir, and thank you for letting me call.
Thanks, Austin. Good night. So I'm going to allow some of these metrics to continue to roll while we continue to talk. And I'm going to explain my thought process concerning national championships and just flat out wins and losses, and why they're more important and relevant and meaningful now and in 1980 than they were in 1900. This is why. Pretty simple. So number one, go back and look and see whatever team you want to look at. I don't care who it is. Any team, go back to 1910, go back to 1900, pick out a year and determine their schedule. Look at their schedule and look at who they're playing. They're generally playing half their schedule against legitimate, personnel-driven, stocked teams. They're playing other universities of their same caliber, but they're filling out a schedule that has club teams from colleges, high school teams even. Okay. Next, let's understand that we currently have a system to determine the national champion that involves teams being selected. Sure, it's an invitational, it's not a true playoff, but those teams play against each other and determine a national champion. And in the former era, the BCS era, we had 2 teams selected. Before that, there was just a vote. But at least there was a vote among people, roughly 100 people that watched the sport and determined based on wins and losses and results and level of play who should win a national championship. But prior to 1936, they're just teams claiming national titles. And yes, there were services, whether they did this retroactively or not, or did it in the moment, assigned national championships. And there was far less crossover play. The frequency of teams playing from coast to coast back in 1905 was not nearly what it is now. Okay. And then we also have the aspect of the level of play, the style of play, the quality of play. All of that is nothing close to what it is now. These guys are basically professional athletes, and they are doing a job. They are working a full-time job. They are training. They are lifting weights. They're watching game film. They're going to meetings. They are working a job and applying themselves to football. Okay. And there are massive staffs of coaches with high level experience who are paid a ton of money to train, coach, and develop them and build game plans. Okay. Knute Rockne and his contemporaries were not paid large sums of money to be solely football coaches. They were math teachers, professors in whatever part of the university. The players themselves were not working as football players. They were students who played football. They were students who practiced football after class, probably every day. And if they didn't every day, nobody was throwing a fit. It probably wasn't a big deal. Maybe it was even mandated at some point by the NCAA that they didn't practice every day. And my last point, and I could make others, would be this point. So let's say, and look at the landscape of the best athletes in this sport. I don't know the percentage of a particular race, meaning black athletes who play major college football. I don't know what that percentage is. It's probably, if we just look at major college football, let's look at Power 5 college football. It's probably 40 or 50%. Okay, the number of black athletes playing in the NFL is about 72%. Okay, so what does that tell us? The population of black males in America is, or blacks overall, or whether you want to take blacks overall or black males compared to the male population, is 12 or 13%. So if 12 or 13% of the population is turning into 70+% of the NFL population, then what does that tell us? That tells us that that group of the population is really good at football. For what reason? I'm not here to try to explain or guess or delve into a bunch of theories. Just they are. Okay. What was not happening in 1905, 1910, 1920, 1940? Those athletes were not given an opportunity to play major college football. Now, unfortunately for society, they were not allowed to play football. But unfortunately for our process and our metrics and our exercise, now we cannot just say, bam, in 1950, the sport became desegregated and we can then evaluate it from 1950 on. There is no Jackie Robinson Day. There is none of that in college football. It evolved. It became integrated throughout the years. Jim Brown played for Syracuse in the mid-1950s, but there were schools in the 1970 turn of that decade in the SEC that had no black players. So it took 15, 20 plus years for the sport to become fully integrated. Therefore, despite what a bunch of morons had to say about me just arbitrarily selecting the year 1970, they should have actually asked me before they made stupid, moronic criticisms of me selecting 1970 as just some arbitrary year. First of all, it's a significant number of years to go back to 1970. So first of all, actually, that list of records and winning percentages since 1970 doesn't even go into the system. It's just there as something to look at and discuss. It's a discussion piece. It doesn't go into the system. So everybody who bashed me for just cherry picking, first of all, that term should be defined for people because they have no idea what the term means. Cherry picking since 1970 or the 21st century or the college football playoff era. I think those three terms easily define why I selected those three to look at. 1970, that was 54 seasons ago. That's a pretty damn good chunk of time. And the 21st century is the 21st century. It's the separation of 2 centuries. That's a pretty significant delineation of time. And number 3 would be a college football playoff era that did not exist before. There was no playoff era. Therefore, I chose to reflect the playoff era. Okay. I didn't just arbitrarily grab years and cherry pick, as some idiots accuse me of doing, because again, they're less than functioning individuals in terms of a brain, or they just want to criticize and know that they can't come on here and criticize me directly because they would get debated under a table. So by 1970, roughly, not exactly in 1970, but that's a pretty good measuring stick of when the sport was fully integrated. So hopefully that makes sense. And probably nobody watching right now or in the chat are the people that I need to be talking to. You are part of the faithful. I appreciate your support. And thanks for allowing me to rant. But when you work on something, try to present facts, fully admitting this is not a perfect system. There are all sorts of components to this that make it impossible to perfect, but the data is the data. And if explained clearly and if understood clearly, it's meaningful, very meaningful. It's not like it's, oh, you can take a little bit from it. No, it's very meaningful. It's pretty much infallible in regards to looking at the schools and seeing how good they are. But no, I didn't just arbitrarily select 1970. Okay. All right. Thank you so much for being here at the Voice of College Football, everyone. I don't see any other comments or questions in the chat, nor calls coming in. This has been our ACC presentation of the best programs in the ACC all time, from top to bottom. And again, it looks something like this. And I apologize that those numbers on the left are not in sequential order perfectly. They are not. But Florida State's number 1 with 2,353 points. Clemson's number 2 with a slim lead over Miami, 21-22 over 21-16. No one else is over 2,000 points. You see Pitt, you see Stanford, you see Georgia Tech all over 1,700 points. We then see the likes of Boston College. North Carolina would be next. They're over 1,600. So is Virginia Tech. Then Boston College over 1,500 and Cal as well. And certainly Wake Forest again. Dave Clausen, God bless you. You've done a hell of a job at Wake Forest. You've been amazing. So great job, Dave Clausen, of getting anything out of that program. You as well, Coach Jim Grube. You did a great job back in the 2000s of getting anything out of Wake Forest, because they've generally been, along with Vanderbilt, and Indiana, Iowa State, and Kansas have been the worst programs in the history of college football, major college football. So that's a debate there that we could have someday that I'm sure people would just come out of the woodwork to join us for that debate. We would get millions of views debating Indiana, Vanderbilt, Wake Forest, and whomever else I named. Kansas State is the worst programs in the history of college football. All right, folks. Tonight we have, and I've lost track of time, so let's see. It's 7:43. The Texas program is still going on. We got our Texas Live show, Horns Huddle. It's on the Texas channel. Get on over there on the Texas channel. Matthew Miller is knocking them dead, I am sure, talking Texas football. And then we've got USC Live. That's coming up at 10 Eastern, 7 Pacific. Too many channels, too many shows. And then I think even Joey Foster at West Virginia, they've got a show on tonight, AI something or other at 7 or 8 o'clock. I can't keep track of that one either. Our next show is going to be Tuesday. We're going to do the Iowa show at 5:30. Then we've got another edition of this. We're going to do the Big 12. So just got a message from Clint Foster. He can't do the Biggest 12 show on Tuesday night. So we're going to do the Big 12. Maybe we'll just put that on the Big 12 channel. Maybe we'll try to drag a big crowd over to the Big 12 channel. Maybe we'll do that and just put it on the Big 12 channel at 7 Eastern on Tuesday. And then, of course, we got the Michigan show with John, TJ, and Ferris. That's at 8 o'clock Eastern on Tuesday. And lest we forget, at 7 o'clock, I know I'm all over the place with these dates and times. The Nebraska show is at 7 as well. So Tuesday, let's get you set. Iowa Live at 5:30. Nebraska Live at 7. The Big 12 program ranking show with me at 7. The Michigan show live at 8 Eastern. There we go. And again, the rest of your nights lines up like this. Ongoing right now, the West Virginia AI show with Joey Foster over on the West Virginia channel. Texas Live, Horns Huddle with Matthew Miller on the Texas channel. We need to drive that Texas channel. And then the USC show coming up at 10 Eastern with Tim, Matt, and myself. And I will need to make some set changes before that. We will put the USC helmet right there. That will take me about 3 hours to do. And we will switch this out. Hopefully you like our little monitor there. We appreciate you all being here at the Voice of College Football. Continue to leave those comments and questions. Hit a like button on your way out. We appreciate you doing that as well. And continue to support here at the Voice of College Football. And we will see you 10 Eastern, 7 Pacific on the USC channel.